Aloha, everybody, and welcome to your assessment training session. My name is Bree, and my goal of this training session is to get you trained for how to do assessment from start to finish and back around again. But I'm entitling this training session Authentic Assessment Made Easy. So it's going to be both authentic and easy, and that's the key. There's been a lot of dread out there among people about assessment. Oh, why do we have to do it? Well, okay, let's just get it done. How do we do it? And so much time is spent talking about it instead of just doing it. And so we're going to learn in this workshop how to do it, and then we're going to do it. And you're going to produce a product by the end of this training session that will get you well on your way to not only complying with ACC-JC requirements for assessment, but actually authentically improving our courses, programs, and institution through this process. Now, you'll notice that I stuck two albatrosses on the screen, and that's because, to me, that will help you remember that really what assessment's about is dialogue. It's about discussions with your colleagues about teaching and learning. It's talk about what we do every day and how to improve it. So I'll get into that a little more in a bit. That was a happy instructor working on assessment at our assessment shindig in fall 2013. So, how do you do assessment? Well, I've heard a lot of talk around the college that people will say, oh, you do it this way. No, you do it that way. Well, in fact, there is no right way to do assessment. The right way is to just do it. Now, we'll get into some of the different philosophies of how to do assessment in a little bit, but the important thing is that you're doing it. And that means that you're looking at your courses, you're looking at how your students are doing in meeting course learning outcomes, CLOs, and you're taking that information and dialoguing, having discussions with your colleagues of teaching and learning. Meaning you're taking how the students do and you're discussing, well, what does it mean how they're doing? We're not so interested in are they doing well or are they not doing well, but how can the process, the curriculum process, be improved with the results that we're getting? Maybe we need to look at how we're teaching things, what we're doing in our classes. Maybe we need to look at what our outcomes are in the first place. Maybe we didn't design the outcomes appropriately. What needs to be improved? And that's what assessment's all about. That's what makes it authentic, that we're taking data and we're using that data to drive improvement in our courses, our programs, and the institution as a whole. So today we're going to just do it. We're going to get something on paper, you're going to turn it in, and you're going to be well on your way to getting assessment done. But another that you hear a lot is, oh my gosh, there's so much work to do. I got to put this stuff on paper. I don't have time for this. I'm not getting paid enough for this. You hear all sorts of things out there. Well, we're going to try to make this as painless as possible by keeping it simple. This is assessment made easy. And I'm going to show you one way you can make assessment easy by using a form that is just one page. You're going to put everything on one page, from what assessment you're going to do for your students to how it maps to higher level outcomes like program learning outcomes and institutional learning outcomes. And you're going to actually be able to score your students on the same sheet. Assessment made easy. So you'll see what we mean in a sec. But you hear also people say, well, I've already assessed that outcome. I've assessed that course. I don't want to do it again. It's already done. Well, if that's your attitude, you're not doing assessment the way the ACC-JC wants you to be doing it. Because assessment is an ongoing process. It's a continuous cycle of looking what we're doing and how do we improve it and making those improvements and then looking at it again. And it goes on and on and on. And that keeps teaching and learning active, keeps it a hot topic. It doesn't let us get stagnant. And so assessment can be fun and it can be really important and really a good tool for driving improvement for our students. And that's really why we're all here, right? It's about the students and making things the best we can for our students. So given that, you don't want to assess something and then stop. You want to keep assessing each course, each semester, and in fact, we want to do all the outcomes for each course, each semester. Now you might be saying, that sounds like a lot of work. It's actually not. If we can do something the simple way, we can take all the outcomes for a course, envelop all of them at once into an authentic assessment activity that addresses all those outcomes, and boom, you got it done. And do it again and again and again every semester. And that way you're generating really great data for being able to compare how students are doing from semester to semester, year to year, and that will really tell us whether we are doing things the way we want to be doing or whether there's room for improvement. And if so, what improvements need to be made, and let's go ahead and try implementing those improvements. Now, the other thing that you hear a lot is, oh, okay, well, I'm going to pick course learning outcome number 3 this semester for this course, and then we'll run another assessment activity for program learning outcome number 4 and institutional learning outcome 1. That's way too much work, and it's not even meaningful. Everything's disjointed. So what we're going to do in this training is show you how you can take all your course learning outcomes, assess them simultaneously with one assessment activity, and then boop, 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 map them to the program learning outcomes and the institutional learning outcomes, and even, if applicable, if it's a GE course, your GE outcomes. And you don't have to do separate assessment activities for those. You just map them. You just check off where a particular course learning outcome or set of course learning outcomes applies, falls under the category of the PLOs and the ILOs and, if applicable, the GEOs. So I'll show you what I mean. And finally, the other thing you hear all the time is, oh, well, we have to be standardized, and so therefore we all have to take all the instructors for a particular course, and I'll use the example of Bio 101 because that's one of the courses I teach. Okay, we got everybody who's teaching Bio 101 across the college, and everybody has to take the same multiple choice question and put that same multiple choice question into their final exams, and that way everything's standardized, and then we can come together and talk about how the students did. Okay, that's one way you could do things, but the question is that an authentic way to do assessment? Does it really tell us anything? What's the point of a course learning outcome? It's to say, okay, this is something we want our students to be able to do by the end of the course. Well, let's say that you had a course learning outcome on some given topic in Biology 101. Maybe it's the plasma membrane. You know, students will understand the way molecules go in and out of a plasma membrane. Well, if you put a multiple choice question on your final and everybody does that and the student gets it wrong, does that mean they really didn't understand how things cross the plasma membrane, that they did not meet that outcome? Or does it just mean they got that test question wrong? And if everybody who's teaching that course is doing the same thing, the same question, does it really tell us about overall how our students are doing in that course? I would argue that doing what's called diversified assessment activities might be a better way to go to give us a more comprehensive picture. And what I mean by that is that every person teaching that course picks a different assessment activity to look at the same course outcomes. So if there are 4 course learning outcomes for a particular course, everybody who's teaching that course is addressing all 4 of those at the same time with one assessment activity, but they do different assessment activities. So for example, maybe I choose to use a lab activity to address those 4 course learning outcomes. And maybe Sally Sue chooses to do a comprehensive essay on a final exam. And Joe Bob decides to do maybe a project, a hands-on creative project where that addresses all of those 4 outcomes. Well, that's great because now we're looking at different methods for the students to meet those outcomes. And so we each do our own grading and our own way of assessing how the students met those outcomes with that particular activity. And then the discussion part comes in. The 3 of us get together and we look at our own individual student scores and we say, okay, do we feel like they're meeting all these outcomes across the board? You know, were they stronger doing it with meeting those outcomes with a project versus with an essay, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Overall, how are our students doing in meeting these course learning outcomes? And at that point you say, okay, well, maybe they didn't meet them as strongly as we wanted them to. So let's look at where the strengths and weaknesses are. Where do we need to concentrate our improvement efforts, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. This is discussions of teaching and learning, and that's where we want to go. So this makes it easy too because we all are already doing these things in our classes. So-and-so already puts an essay on their final exam. So-and-so already does a project. So-and-so already does a lab. So it's just a matter of getting what we're already doing and formalizing it. It's not extra work. So really, it's as easy as 1, 2, 3, and you can see baby Evie here thinks so too. She's volunteered to be the assessment mascot for the college. Okay, Easy as 1, 2, 3. We're going to do this in 3 steps, and we're going to do it today at this workshop, and you'll have 90% of it done before the end of this workshop. That's the goal anyway. Step 1 is we need to look at what our course learning outcomes are. There are forms called course outlines, and these are where any proposed course gets put onto forms, sent in through the process, and that course will either get approved, asked to be revised, or rejected. Access the course learning outcomes for any course in the college, and in fact, any course in the college system with the University of Hawaii system by going to this phenomenal website here called Curriculum Central. So I'm going to show you how to go to Curriculum Central, pull up your course's course learning outcomes, and then we're going to do the next plunge. And this is where we're going to kind of kill 2 birds with 1 stone. You're not going to just be doing assessment today. You're also going to be doing some revising of course learning outcomes if necessary and submitting those for possible revision. So what we're going to do, we're going to go to Curriculum Central. We are going to pull up your course's course learning outcomes, and we're going to read them and look at them and say, okay, do these CLOs need to be revised? Well, how will you know if they need to be revised? Number 1, are there too many of them? A lot of the courses have maybe 10 or 11 course learning outcomes. That's a lot, and it's more than necessary. And if you have 10 or 11 or 20 or 30 outcomes, every single one of those needs to be assessed every semester. That's a lot of work. So let's work on reducing these course learning outcomes down to 3 or 4, and then at that point, making them authentic, making them things that are the take-home messages of the course. What do students going through that course need to be able to do? And it's important to understand that course learning outcomes are not the same thing as content and objectives. So for example, for Biology 101, maybe a learning outcome would be that they can apply the scientific method to experimental design, data collection, and data analysis. That's a course learning outcome. The fact that they know the steps of the scientific method, that's more an objective or content. That's a content-based thing. What they can do with that is an outcome. So we'll take a look at Biology 101 as an example. So you're going to reduce your course learning outcomes down to 3 or 4. You're going to make sure that they are outcomes and not objectives. And you're going to make sure that they're using Bloom's taxonomy. Now, most of you have probably heard of Bloom's taxonomy, but it is an important tool because by using words that are in Bloom's taxonomy, it makes sure that your outcomes are measurable. That means that you can actually do an assessment and have it determine whether or not the students are meeting an outcome. So for example, if you put that as an outcome, understand the scientific method, well, understand is a very difficult thing to measure. They might understand it, but that doesn't mean they can put that knowledge down on paper. However, to explain something or apply something or diagram something, these are all words that can be measured with assessments. And so that's where we want to go. So you'll need to look at your CLOs, figure out if they're using Bloom's taxonomy, and if not, rewrite them. Now, of course, you can't just suddenly rewrite your course learning outcomes and have them be the official course learning outcomes. They have to go through the curriculum process. So after you've revised your CLOs today, I want you to go back after the workshop and dialogue with your colleagues about what you have proposed. And if everybody's in agreement, or if you want to work together to fine-tune those, then go ahead and submit it as a revision to the course outline for your course. That's part of keeping this cycle going, and very, very important. So you're kind of killing 2 birds with 1 stone today. You'll do the assessment plan, but you'll also be looking at your course outlines and revising them if needs be. So let me just click here. First, I'm going to click on Bloom's taxonomy just to show you. I've put a link here. I'll provide this for you guys, and we'll provide it at the workshop. And this way, you'll be able to see what we mean by Bloom's taxonomy. So I'm going to call this up right here. And this is a PDF that you can download. And you'll see that there's different versions here. So, you know, there's knowledge words, comprehension words, application words, analysis, synthesis, and evaluation. So as you go through here, you get to higher order levels of assessment. And then you see down here all sorts of words under each of those categories. So the highest level of Bloom's taxonomy would be words like appraise, argue, assess, attach, choose, etc. And lower ones, define, describe. So these are all measurable outcomes. Okay, now let's go to Curriculum Central. So here's how you do it. If you click on this link here, or you just go to the hawaii.edu website, you want to go under Faculty and Staff and scroll down to where you see Curriculum Resources, and you have right here Curriculum Central. Now you'll need to log in with your college ID and password. And you have to be a full-time faculty to be able to get into this program. So if you're a lecturer, you'll need to be sponsored by a full-time faculty member to gain access to these. And then notice that it has courses, it has programs, so you can pull up information about programs. We're going to start with courses, and I'm going to go down to Display Outline. So if I go to Display Outline, and I'm going to go to ones that are already approved. And by the way, the college offers wonderful training sessions on Curriculum Central. But I'm going to go down, I'm just going to stick with Biology 101 as my example. So I'm going to click Bio 101 and go. And you'll see this shows you all the community colleges in the system that have a course outline for this course. So I'm going to pick on HAW for Hawaii Community College. And here's the course outline. Now, something to look at is number 6. This is the proposed term to take effect. And this also gives an indication of how old the course outline is. So this says summer 2002. That's old. That means we haven't been revising this. We need to revise this outline. And any outline that is, I'd say, older than a couple years, you really should be looking at and trying to revise. Now, as you scroll down, you'll see all sorts of information, but then you get to a box here. Now, this says course SLOs, which were student learning outcomes. Now we're calling them course learning outcomes because if you think about it, all outcomes are student learning outcomes, even the institutional ones. But we want to get down to the course level, which is why we're going to call them CLOs, course learning outcomes. Now notice that there are 5 outcomes for this course. I'd say that's too many, so I would like to break them down to 3 or 4. They do use Bloom's taxonomy: apply, describe, demonstrate, identify, illustrate. So these are good. And I'm going to try to create an assessment that would tackle all of these outcomes at once. But because there are more than 3 or 4, I would work on today first actually just trying to condense these down, figuring out a way that I could make these into 3 or 4. That's how you do it. So what I want you to do is, if you just select over these, and if you're using a PC, you would hit Control and hold it down and hit C for copy, and then paste it into the course learning outcome form that you've been provided. And that way you have it just there. You can have a quick look at it, and then it's also easy to revise it right there on the computer. So just copy this, paste it into a Word format, and that way it's easy to work on. Okay, so that's how to get your course learning outcomes from Curriculum Central. All right, step 2. Now we get into the assessment nitty-gritty. This first part is, you might call an assessment plan. The idea is that we're going to be figuring out what assessment activity are we going to do for this course this semester that is going to address all of those outcomes, or at least as many as possible, all at once. And so, easy way to do this, I've provided you with what's called a simplified assessment rubric. Sometimes it's called an Uber rubric, I like to call it, but simplified assessment rubric. That means put your activity on one page, map it on the same page, assess it on the same page. Here you go. All right, so this is the simplified assessment rubric, and I'm going to show you an example of how you would fill this out. But very simple. You're going to be able to complete 99% of this today. You're going to put in what course are you assessing. So if I was doing Biology 101, I'd put Bio 101. The term that you're assessing it, because remember, you're going to want to do this every single semester. So I'd put, for example, Spring 2014. Instructor, that's who you are. And program. For most of us, this will be liberal arts, but you also want to include what department you're in, because we're not doing it so much now, but eventually we'll have program learning outcomes for our particular departments. So go ahead and write, for me it would be liberal arts - math and science. And then you're going to say, of those 3 or 4 course learning outcomes that you now have, how many of those are going to be assessed in this assessment? So just put a check. You know, I'm going to be assessing all 4 of them, so I'm going to go check, 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 check. The only part you're not going to be filling out today is here where it says average score. That's how did the students do on average on that outcome with this assessment activity. So that's what you'll be filling in after you administer the assessment activity. Everything else on here is going to be filled in today. So your assessment activity itself, you'll type into here, and you'll include in each component which CLO or CLOs are addressed by that part of that activity. And I'm going to show you an example in a minute. And down here we have the mapping. So here are the possible PLOs. So liberal arts, for example, has a lot of PLOs right now. Again, I'm hoping as an institution we'll work on condensing even the PLOs and the GELOs down to 3 or 4 that are quick and easy to measure. The ILOs, we only have 3 right now. So you're just going to check. You're going to kind of look at your PLOs, look at the ILOs, look at your CLOs, and say, okay, where does this fall in? Which CLO, which one of the PLOs or which ones of the PLOs does it fit in? And same with the ILOs, etc. And you're just going to check all that apply. And then later on, when you go to administer this assessment activity, I urge you to use this scoring rubric right here. Now, that doesn't mean that you need to use that rubric when you're grading, for example, the essay that you implemented. You could still use whatever you normally do, on a scale of 0% to 100%. Maybe the student scored a 73% and the student scored an 85%. That's fine, but you and your colleagues will sit down together and say, okay, which of those scores fall under the category of minimally met expectations? Which ones were adequately meeting expectations, etc. So when you fill out this form, you're just going to use 0, 1, 2, 3, or some decimal in between those as your average score. That makes it easy. It makes it easy to compare grades across courses and across instructors within a course. But that doesn't mean you need to change the way you grade your assessments when you administer them. It just means how you're going to assess those grades on this form. So let's take an example. I took an example with a course I used to teach at another college, which was marine biology. And this is a hypothetical example. The scores are all hypothetical, which is why I put spring 2016 here. But just to give you an idea of an assessment I used to do, an assessment activity, and how each component of that activity would map to the particular course learning outcomes, and then how those would map after that. So, again, initially, this line here would be blank, but I would have check marks across the board here because with this one assessment activity, I'm going to be assessing course learning outcomes 1, 2, 3, and 4, all with one activity. So I went and I stuck my course learning outcomes in here just so you could see them. So I chose 4, identify marine organisms in field and lab-based settings, apply the scientific method to experimental design, data collection, data analyses, explain ecological interactions among marine organisms with each other, their abiotic environment, and humans, and describe human impacts on the marine environment. So here's my activity. I chose to do it based on a lab. So I'm having the students write a lab report that will analyze their data from a field lab activity in the Rocky Intertidal Zone. This was in off the coast of California, where they have Rocky Intertidal Zones. And so in this lab, the students, they use a field guide with a dichotomous key to identify organisms in their tidal pool to the genus or species level where possible. Okay, that component right there, I think that maps back to course learning outcome 1, identify marine organisms in a field and lab-based setting. So I'm going to write in course learning outcome 1 is associated with that part of that activity. Now the second one, they're going to use common sampling techniques to record the data regarding species richness and abundance of tidal pool organisms. That's all ecology stuff. And the vertical zonation patterns where each species is found. Well, I think those map back to course learning outcomes 2 and 3. Applying the scientific method to experimental design, data collection, data analyses. Yep, they're doing that. And explain ecological interactions among marine organisms. Yeah, they're doing that. So that part actually addresses 2 course learning outcomes at once. So I'm going to write that in there, course learning outcomes 2 and 3. C, calculate overall species diversity in the tidal pools. Okay, well, same thing, right? They're collecting data, they're analyzing it, and they're looking at ecological interactions. So that also addresses CLOs 2 and 3. And correlate species diversity data quantitatively and graphically. Okay, again, course learning outcomes 2 and 3. And finally, discuss and analyze threats from human activities to current and future species diversity and tidal pool ecosystems. Now that, okay, well, they are talking about, course learning outcome 3 because they're looking at, how they're interacting with humans. And then, of course learning outcome 4 where they're looking at human impacts on the environment. Booyah! I just did all 4 course learning outcomes with one assessment activity, in this case, a lab report. Maybe one of my colleagues teaching this course decided they wanted to do the same kind of thing, but with an essay. And someone else did a lecture-based project, something like that. But all 4 learning outcomes were assessed with this one activity, and that's why it's a simplified UBA rubric. Okay, now I need to map these back to my PLOs and ILOs. I put NA across the board for the GELOs because this is not a GE course. And so one thing I've provided you with is a list of the current PLOs for liberal arts and all the other associate's degree programs at the college and the ILOs. And so you want to look back at them. So let's see if I can call that up for a sec. Okay, so here is the list of PLOs for all the programs at the college and the ILOs. So if I just look and say, okay, let's look at my ILOs. Okay, our graduates will be able to communicate effectively. Yeah, that applies, right? I'm having them write a report, so they're communicating. And 2, they're able to gather, evaluate, and analyze ideas and information. Yeah, they're doing that, right? They're out there collecting data, they're interpreting it. So I say that this course is directly mappable to ILOs 1 and 2. Does it address 3? Well, it kind of does, but it's not really focused on cultural diversity. It's more scientific diversity. So I'm going to leave that one out, but that's okay. There are plenty of other courses in our program that will address that learning outcome. Now, if I go down to my liberal arts, I say, okay, here's the 10 of them. Okay, yes, they're communicating. It addresses that one. Critical reading, not so much by this particular assessment activity, so I'm not going to choose that one. Critical thinking, absolutely, right? They're having to critically analyze the data that they're collecting. So I'm going to click that, etc. I might not choose 9 and 10 because this study doesn't so much address that. So anyway, that's kind of the idea. You're going to go through these PLOs and the ILOs and figure out which ones apply to the particular assessment activity. Okay, so that's how to map these. And so you'll see that I've gone and mapped these to ILOs 1 and 2 and to PLOs for liberal arts 1, 3, 4, 6, 7, 8. It'll depend on your particular assessment and your course for which ones you choose. So that's what you have to do today. That's all we're asking you to do is turn in this form, a copy of it, and keep one for yourself because you're going to use the same form at the end of the semester after you have gone ahead and implemented this particular assessment activity that you've chosen, and you're going to come back and look at your grades. You're going to say, okay, maybe you scored them out of 10 points for this particular activity. Well, now with your colleagues, figure out how that equates to this 0 to 3 scale, 3 being exceeding expectations, 0 meaning not met these expectations, and then take an average among the students for that 0 to 3 scale. So, for example, perhaps I found that learning outcome number 1, the students had an average score of 2.76, was a 2.3, number 3 was a 1.4, et cetera, et cetera. And that's what you're going to come back later and talk about with your colleagues. So everybody who did their assessments, now we have tangible numbers for each outcome, and we can start comparing the numbers. So that's where we get to step 3, closing the loop. So step 3, what do we mean by closing the loop? We mean you're taking that data, you've taken your plan, you take the data, you come back with your colleagues, and you discuss, just like those albatrosses were doing. We wanted to close the loop by looking at these numbers, figuring out what they mean, and what does that mean for needs of improvement in our courses. And we're going to then create those improvements, implement them, and assess the implementations, assess the improvements. And that's called closing the loop. And it's in particular closing the loop when we let those results trickle upwards into eventually to the whole institution. And I'll show you what I mean by that. So I want you to think of assessment kind of like a Celtic knot where these loops just keep going and going and going and they never stop. And here's another nice picture from our assessment shindig in fall 2013. Okay, so closing the loop, it's about that authentic assessment, really figuring out how our students are doing in the courses, making improvements where they're needed, and that's how we're going to be able to close this loop. We're going to close it by discuss, discuss, discuss. And one of the things you should do when you're meeting with your colleagues and you're discussing what changes you're going to make to your curriculum and what changes you're going to make at the program level, et cetera, record these discussions. Either have somebody in the room typing while everybody's discussing, recording what conversations are there, in other words, taking minutes, or even actually record them with a recording device, and so that you can transcribe them later. ACCJC loves that. They love to see the dialogue that's going on about assessment. That lets them know that we're really using this assessment authentically, that we're using it to make positive changes at the school. So in other words, we're going to take our assessment results, we're going to figure out how the students did on our little forms, the same form that we put our assessment activity, and now we're going to let those results drive course and program improvement, and overall, ultimately, institutional improvement. So, how are we going to do that? How are we really going to close this loop and allow it to really make improvements, not just at the course level, not just at the program level, but at the institutional level? How are we going to do this? Well, you could think of all this assessment stuff as a big ball of yarn. You know, here's your Celtic knot, right? This poor kitty cat looks really confused. Well, we're going to do this by allowing the results of our courses trickle on up to the program level, the ILO level, but also to all the things that make our institution successful. Budget, program review, master planning, strategic planning. These are the nuts and bolts of things that allow an institution to prosper. So we're going to take the results of our course learning outcomes, we've mapped them to the PLOs, we've mapped them to the ILOs, and now we're going to say, okay, are our students getting what they need? And even every year when we do our annual program reviews, a program review committee can sit down and say, okay, has it been doing its assessment? And has it been using the results of the assessment to implement change? And if not, if there's no implementation of improvement going on, maybe there's a problem with that program. Maybe that's not where we want to focus our college's resources on. So in other words, the results of the program review that are the results of the assessment can drive improvements to budget planning. We can say we're going to put the resources into programs where we actually have data on the success of the program and how the program's doing improvements to it. Not every program is going to necessarily be successful. Maybe not, the students aren't meeting the outcomes the way we would like them to, but are we talking about ways of improving the process? And that's what's really important. If the students aren't meeting outcomes, maybe they're not meeting outcomes because our dialogue has shown that they didn't have the equipment they needed to meet those outcomes. Well, that comes up in program review, and that can drive the budget to make sure that we allocate resources in the future to providing the equipment that the students need to meet those outcomes. This is all part of closing that loop. And when we look at the results of the program reviews and we look at what's happening with the budget, this can all be part of long-term planning, how we're going to create master plans for each area of the college, and what's our overall institutional strategic plan. The ACCJC wants to see that our planning at the college, our decisions we're making on devoting resources, hiring, et cetera, growing programs, this is all based on data. It's not based on what we feel like doing or the politics. It's based on real hardcore assessment data and the dialogues that come out of it. So this is what we mean by closing the loop, making everything tied together. So your goal for today, you've all received now both an electronic and a hard copy of the Simplified Assessment Rubric form. Your goal today is to fill it out. Fill out every part of this form except for the average scores. Those will come in your second workshop after you've already implemented your assessment activity. But today you're going to revise your CLOs if needed and come up with your authentic assessment activity, which are directly tied into those CLOs so that you'll be assessing all your CLOs at once. You're going to check off where they map to at the PLO level and the ILO level, and if it's a GE course, also the GELO level. And turn in a copy to us electronically. We'll take care of the rest. We'll put it to where it needs to go into cyberspace, and you keep a copy for yourself, and that will be what you actually score your students on. I hope this was helpful. I hope the training's good. If not, that's why we have facilitators. That's why we have an assessment committee. We are here to help you get this done. We're going for 100%. Every single person teaching a class at this college will do this with every course every semester, every outcome. Hope this is helpful, and you can reach me at dayb@hawaii.edu. Take care.